Welcome to Procuring Locally. This was originally presented as Procurement 201 at the Farm to School, Farm to Preschool conference in 2014. It has been updated to reflect recent USDA guidance. I'm Kathryn Hodges from the Department of Education, Office of Nutrition Programs and Services. The recorded webinar, Procurement Basics, covered defining procurement, touch on procurement regulations, talk about various procurement methods, define small purchase thresholds, stress good procurement principles and practices, stress the importance of detailed specifications, and providing a list of prohibitive procurement practices. This webinar will build on that information and will cover ways to procure, the request for information, invitation for bid, request for proposals, contract requirements, documentation to maintain, writing clear specifications, defining local, incorporating geographic preference, evaluating bids, managing the contract, forward contracts. When making a formal procurement, whether it is one that exceeds your small purchase threshold or falls within your small purchase threshold, you have a choice to issue an invitation for bid or a request for proposal. If you need an idea of what is out there that is available to buy or who is out there that is available to sell to you, you may issue a request for information. Federal regulations require that every purchase made out of the nonprofit food service account be made using a procurement process, no matter how small the purchase is. The regulations do set out a different process for micro, small, and large purchases. Purchases under the small purchase threshold can follow the informal procurement method, which is simpler, but it is still a procurement process that must be followed. Under the regulations, even the micro purchase threshold requires that a procurement process be conducted. We will talk more in a bit about the informal and formal procurement method, but first, let's talk about what the regulations are. Procurement regulations flow from federal to state to local. You should follow the strictest regulations that apply to you. If local or state regulations conflict with federal regulations or are less restrictive than federal, follow the federal regulations. Responses to the request for information can be used to create a vendor list for you to use for informal purchases. You should still contact the vendors for each procurement, getting bids from at least 3, and document the process. An invitation for bid is used when the contract will be awarded solely based on the bid price. This method is most often used when contracting for goods. Although verbiage can be added to apply geographic preference, the contract award will still be based on the lowest bid or the lowest evaluated bid. We'll have examples later of what I mean by lowest evaluated bid. A request for proposal is used when the contract will be awarded on criteria or factors other than bid price. However, the bid price must have the highest weighted criteria. This method is most often used when contracting for services, like food service management company services. When issuing any kind of contracts or making any kind of purchase, you must use good procurement principles. Document each step of the way and manage the contract effectively. As a reminder, good procurement principles include fair and open competition, fairness and integrity, using responsive and responsible vendors, and transparency. Documentation is needed for every step of the procurement process. Keep your solicitation paperwork organized in one file. When in doubt, keep it. This documentation must be kept for 3+ the current year beyond the life of the contract. For example, a food service management contract has 1 original year and up to 4 one-year renewal options. The supporting documentation would be kept 3 plus the current year beyond the end of the fourth renewal option. Documentation can include identifying the need and planning the purchase, the specification, the invitation for bid or the request for proposal, advertisement, the vendor responses, criteria used to evaluate the vendor responses, the evaluation scoring, the contract award justification, the contract itself, and then managing the contract. Managing is what happens after the contract is awarded. It can be as basic as receiving the item, logging it into inventory, and confirming that what was ordered is what was received. If there was a problem with the item, you must note the action taken, if any. This can change a vendor's status from responsible to not responsible. If you are managing a service contract, you must review the invoices to make sure that only allowable items are purchased. Make sure you are receiving all discounts, rebates, and credits earned on purchases made on your behalf. Make sure that the information being provided for claiming purposes is accurate, etc. The documentation to support contract management can include packing slips, invoices, reports, correspondence between the contractor and you, discounts, rebates, and credits. Are specifications needed? Of course they are. How can you buy if you don't know what you want or need? For the informal process, write down exactly what you are purchasing and ask each vendor you call for the exact same thing. For the formal process, your specifications are part of the invitation for bid or request for proposal. Here are just a few areas where you can specify what you want when you write your specification. Product name and variety, the grade, size, quantity, quality, cleanliness, packaging, delivery, food safety, farm practices, and characteristics. You can apply a geographic preference for fresh apples, but you cannot for applesauce. Unprocessed means that the agricultural product retains its inherent characteristics. It is important to remember that geographic preference is a preference only, not a specification. You can prefer an aspect in defining local, but you cannot require it. If the item you are purchasing had any of these things done to it, you may add geographic preference wording to your solicitation. Cooling, refrigeration, freezing, peeling, slicing, dicing, cutting, chopping, shucking, grinding, making patties with no additives, drying, dehydrating, washing, packaging, bagging, vacuum packing, adding preservation to prevent oxidation, butchering livestock or poultry, pasteurizing. Who defines local? You do. Just as long as your definition does not restrict fair and open competition. Your solicitation must be clear on how the different areas of the specifications will be evaluated. Be prepared to evaluate your bids, document, and keep the evaluations. A good way to start in defining what local means to you is to issue a request for information. That will help you find out what and who is out there to sell unprocessed agricultural products to you. As long as your definition does not restrict competition by limiting your term local to include only one or two potential vendors, then your definition guides your procurement process. Also, you can define local in different ways for different products. You cannot arbitrarily break up your purchase into smaller pieces to fall under the small purchase threshold, but you can break up your purchase if you have a good reason. For example, breaking up your apple purchases from your citrus purchases because there are many local vendors who can bid on apples, but only one or two produce wholesalers who would bid on both apples and citrus. In this case, you'd be increasing competition in your apple purchase and hopefully getting a lower price because of the increased competition. In addition, you can apply a geographic preference for the apples. While there are very few orange growers that would fall under category of local. Or if you only need lots of carrots in October for a harvest of the month menu, but you don't normally serve a lot of carrots, you could separate the carrots you need in October into their own purchase, and then conduct a separate procurement process for supplying all the rest of your produce during the rest of the school year. Your definition for local may be different for different items, but whatever it is, write it down, document it, and keep it on file. Decide on how much the geographic preference is worth to you. For example, is it worth paying 10% more for local apples? You'll disclose that in the solicitation and evaluate the bids accordingly. In this example, we are offering a 10% price preference if at least 60% of the products are sourced from within the state. We are looking at a total contract price. Dick's Farm was the only bidder who could meet the preference that 60% of the products come from within the state. The solicitation allows for a 10% preference. You identify what 10% of their bid equals. In this case, $35,000 times 10% is $3,500, and subtract it from their final bid for evaluation purposes only. Their bid remains at $35,000. Their evaluated bid is $31,500. However, it is still not low bid, so Tom's Farm is awarded the contract. In this case, we are quoted a price per pound. The solicitation allows for 10 points to be awarded to the bidder that could meet the geographic preference, with 1 point equaling 1 cent. Dick's Farm, although bidding $2.05 per pound, is the only vendor awarded the 10 points, which lowered their quote to an evaluated bid of $1.95 per pound. They are still paid $2.05 per pound, but their evaluated bid of $1.95 won them the contract award. Again, it is important to identify how much a geographic preference is worth to you. Also, can your budget support the request for geographic preference? Take a look at what you are ordering and what it will be used for when creating your specifications. For example, a tomato that will be sliced up to add to sandwiches or to be served on the side may need to be cosmetically more appealing than tomatoes that are to be made into salsa or soup. Your solicitation should be clear about what you want and how you want it delivered. Another example, you want a total of 1,000 pounds of carrots, which are to be delivered 100 pounds per week over 10 weeks. You want them with the greens off and the dirt brushed and cleaned off. You want them in bags or boxes no heavier than 20 pounds. It will be up to you if you want to or need to apply a geographic preference on this purchase. Now we'll talk about forward contracts. What's the benefit? For you, the satisfaction of knowing your farmer and exactly where your produce is coming from. You know, if all goes as planned, that all your needs will be met. For the farmer, a guaranteed buyer at a competitive price. Be sure you understand the risks of a forward contract before you enter into one. For the producer, it allows time to plan for a large demand of their product and plant according to the school district's needs. But you always need a contingency plan. An example of one could be requesting zucchini but willing to accept summer squash from the farmer, or purchasing zucchini from a distributor if necessary because the farmer's crop failed. The contingency plan should be outlined in the solicitation as well. In writing specifications for a forward contract, you would want to identify what product is required, identify how much product is required, Identify how the product is to be delivered. Identify when the product is to be delivered. Identify when payment for the produce is issued. Identify the contingency plan just in case there's one that is needed. A crop failure would not necessarily cause a farmer to become a not responsible contractor just because they ended up not being able to fulfill the provisions in the contract. If it happens again, you might want to reconsider issuing a contract to a farmer with poor farming skills. Please feel free to contact the Office of Nutrition Programs and Services with any questions. Thank you for your time.